Hi, this is the third piece of my reflections project that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Previously, in my last video, I had gotten into how infant development would be affected due to social isolation. More specifically, I would like to look in infant development and how that's affected due to the social isolation due to the pandemic. There has been a lot of difficulty finding sources for this due to how new the phenomenon is. Thus, the bulk of my scholarly articles are due to isolation coming from maternal depression and maternal mental health issues. I will be integrating the pandemic in my everyday sources as a possible cause in addition to infant isolation. I'd used a few examples from my own personal experience with the nanny that I family for, as well as an article about COVID-19 and how that threatens maternal mental health and infant development, with possible paths from stress and isolation. As I just mentioned, the interest for this idea comes from my own personal experience working with children. In my past work history, I've worked with infants before the pandemic and had a comfortable grasp on the developmental milestones for infants and toddlers. Since the pandemic, I stopped working my 9 to 5 with children on the spectrum and have moved into a private infant care position. The children I look after are 7 months old and a recently turned 4-year-old. The kids have spent their critical period of development and cognitive learning in social isolation, only interacting with the same 5 people. And I'm wondering how that's going to affect their overall social and emotional development, especially in the 7-month-old girl that I spend time with. The entire span of her life has been in quarantine, which is interesting to stir about because this is her normal. She doesn't know any differently when the adults around her and others have a completely different view of what normal everyday living is. So today I'll be summarizing some of the findings that I have made previously and introducing and delving further into my 2 empirical articles to look further into the impact of social isolation on infant development. So the first article that I'm going to be talking about is called Patterns of Attachment in 2 and 3-year-olds in Normal Families and Families with Parental Depression. The source was looking at developmental differences between infants in isolation who had received in-home services and those who did not. This sample of participants in the study were referred and gathered in an intervention group that serves low-income families. Because of the concerns about quality of the caregiving environment for the infant, the program was widely publicized in their communities 6 months before to ensure that the majority of people knew what the services were being offered to them. Because of the severity of the environmental circumstances, no family was turned away if they inquired for help. The sample in the study was to no extent the category of weird. They paid extreme attention to the demographic data and tried to account for the underrepresented group. They coded for 10 demographic variables, including 6 used for matching purposes. This data was recorded from the mother's interviews: mother's race, high school graduate status, per person weekly income, age of mother, child sex and birth order, mother's age at time of first child, and the number of siblings underneath the age of 6. The method, they use 2 methods here to assess. The first one that they use is the strain situation developed by Ainsworth and Wittig to look at the infant's attachment style as the main assessment along that was used in the present study to assess the infant's attachment security, and then they use the Bayley scales of infant development, mental and motor skills, to measure the infant's cognitive development. They took a range of baseline data for comparison, and the study was looking specifically into mothers with bipolar and unipolar disorder and how that affects the infant's attachment style. Around 55% of the infants under the bipolar category of mothers had an avoidant attachment style, while the other half of the unipolar infants had a ratio of 53 to 27, with secure attachment being in the majority. The key takeaway of this study is the results point to the negative development consequences associated with the severe risk conditions to the buffering effects of developmentally oriented home visiting services for infants at a great social risk. There was no main effective treatment on the infant development scores. However, we did see a significant effect of depression. Infants of depressed mothers who received in-home treatment achieved significantly higher mental development scores than groups who did not receive treatment in terms of infant attachment. The negative effects of social isolation come in regard to infant attachment and less regard to mental development. The infants that were in the untreated group in a high rate of insecure, unorganized attachment. Furthermore, my understanding of this source states that the infants may not have a mental development delay, but their social skills and their interaction and their emotional and social security due to their attachment styles will make interaction and social events difficult compared to somebody who had grown up in a secure base attachment. My next source that I'm going to be talking about is called Infants at Social Risks, Maternal Depression and Family Support Services as Mediators of Infant Development and Security of Attachment. This is another article that bases the main cause for the infant isolation due to the mother's mental health. I would look at the common aspect between the other article that I researched. There is an overwhelming majority of the infants that have an insecure or an AC type pattern attachment style. In this study, the sample consists of 99 children, 14 offspring of bipolar depressive, manic depressive mothers, 42 of major unipolar depression, and 12 mothers with minor depression, all of the 31 mothers with no history of affective disturbance. I would say that this article is not in the weird category. The majority of the women in the study are white, with only about 14 to 16% of the participants being non-white African Americans, but they took all of the participants from low-income areas and programs. Families were referred from the programs like Head Start, Women's Infants, Children, Food Voucher Programs, State Department of Child Protective Services, neighborhood pediatric clinics, etc. Only about 50% of the sample in the study had graduated from high school education, and they had served families widely from lower SES classes. Mothers and infants were referred to the intervention group by staff members of health, education, social service agencies serving low-income families because of staff concerns about the quality of caregiving environment for the infant. The methods that they used to assess, the following assessments were collected in 3 contacts with the mother within a 2-week period and when the child reached 18 months of age. Mothers and infants in the high-risk group and the community group were also assessed at 12 months on the home observation, Bailey scales, and strange situation procedure. So very similar, the exact same procedures and methods that they used for the previous article. The results and the takeaway, the results of the study support the conclusion that developmentally oriented home visiting services can have a significant impact on the early development of infants at severe social risk. The negative effects of social risk status were more pervasive in regard to infant attachment security than in regard to mental development. Attachment patterns of maltreated infants remained lately insecure, and over the course of the intervention, despite their large cost of gains, with 22% secure, 11% secure type D, 22% is insecure, and 44% insecure type D. The quality of attachment between mother and child has been associated with the young child's adaptive and maladaptive behaviors. Insecurely attached children, compared to those who are securely attached, have been found to be less competent in their relationships with peers, adults, more fearful to strangers, more prone to behavior problems, including social withdrawal and anxiety, and more dependent on adults. And I think that's a really important takeaway to capitalize on here. The isolation can result in lifelong behavior irregularities and an anxious attachment style. I try my best to talk with the children that I care for and interact with them the best that I can, trying to boost both their creativity and learning. I want to go into how both of these takeaways go further into the single story. So both of these articles really highlight the aspect of motherly depression and how that can affect the infant in more ways than one. In terms of what's going on in this single story, I think that there is something that is huge to point out with the mother that I take care for. She has 2 children, one infant under a year and the other just a 4-year-old with a full-time job as a BCBA for kiddos on the spectrum. I see her day in and day out, and she looks genuinely burnt out and exhausted. And let's pretend for a moment that you're a mother postpartum without the added effects of the pandemic. It's really hard for some people to get back to normal, to feel like themselves again in their own bodies, to get their hormones back in line, to deal with the ups and downs of that, which is a battle war all on its own. The effects of the pandemic are so huge and widespread into little things that other people wouldn't even think of. In my personal experience, there isn't anyone allowed in the house that doesn't live there with the kids or that isn't vaccinated like I am. When she is looking for some time away, she can't call her sisters or her neighbors to come watch the babies because it's not safe for anybody. The single story goes deeper into the day-to-day because every day is one where you have to make the decision to get up and keep going, be resilient, because that's not only you that you have to worry about, it's the families that rely on you heavily as well, coming from the mothers. Numbers and articles are people Numbers in articles are just data on a screen, but you get an entirely new perspective on the situation when you see one of the data points firsthand and learn their stories. The media has been flooded with disaster and ruin for over a year, and I myself has gotten a little desensitized to the media because it's just too much after a while. I sometimes try to avoid it altogether. But when things on the news people are talking about our neighbors and things that are happening in your own backyard, you can really feel the effect and see the toll that it takes on the individuals. The individuals themselves, their children, socially and emotionally. With evidence from the articles above, I also believe that it could be possible the children might suffer socially later on in their lives, and I'm intrigued to see how they develop as they grow older. As I'm planning for my final product, I'm thinking about having my final presentation be some type of children's storybook. I thought that this was super awesome to be able to express our ideas this way, and so my plan is to create a storybook about isolation, or maybe the first day of school for some kids, the experience of their first day, and how the new normal has changed. I was also maybe even thinking about doing a side-by-side, so a full page layout spread, and each page is going to be what it would be like pre-pandemic and what it's like post-pandemic, just interacting with all of the kids in your classroom, going in, the cafeteria, all of the teachers. The social norms that we have created during the pandemic, I believe, are going to stick for years to come because it was our harsh reality for over a year. Like I said, I would either like to do a side-by-side rendition or something like that, and it's important to me to be able to tell more than the single story, to go deeper than that, because these kids that we have around literally do not know any differently from this crazy, unprecedented time. Or I was thinking about worried thoughts of a child stepping into this new environment, scared that he or she won't make friends or that it'll be scary, and then ending up with, at the end of the book, with a bunch of friends and nothing to worry about, but also putting the emphasis on this time during quarantine, implementing signals like bumping elbows instead of hands, or calling the timeout chair quarantine. At the end of the book, I'm leaning towards to making some sort of positive regard as into moving into normal civilization and interacting with people. So, thank you.